They don't know how to explain it. The energy shifted, but they can't track the source. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. Yet something rewrote the dynamic the moment you walked in. And now, they're adjusting. Their posture, their tone, their words, all of it, recalibrating unconsciously. Not because you said anything, but because they can feel it. The presence, the pressure, the intelligence behind the stillness. You're not observing them, you're mapping them, not judging their actions, but isolating the intention behind each one. This isn't passive awareness. This is weaponized cognition, tactical perception. You don't look at a room for what it is. You decode it for what it's hiding. Every breath taken too early, every glance held too long, every contradiction between words and body language, cataloged, assessed, stored. While they think they're still playing their part, they don't realize they've already been profiled. Not emotionally, mechanically, precisely. Your sixth sense doesn't whisper, it calculates, and it never waits. You don't need more information. You read the moment itself. You anticipate shifts not by chance, but through brutal repetition. You've seen enough betrayal to know the pattern of a lie before it even leaves their mouth. You've watched enough power plays to recognize the one thread that holds everything together. And that's where you go, right for the thread. You don't confront the surface. You exploit the structure beneath it. While others react to what they see, you break down what they overlooked. Your awareness isn't spiritual, it's surgical. It cuts through the noise like a scalpel through flesh. No emotion, no hesitation, just clarity. They talk about being strategic, like it's a mindset. But for you, it's a reflex. You don't turn it on, it lives in you. You don't need to prep, don't need to hype yourself, because your default mode is observation fed directly into intent. People think you're calm. No, you're computing, estimating, measuring. You don't wait to see who's in control. You quietly take it. Not with words, but with posture. Not with volume, but with presence. You place your mind in every angle of the room before your feet even cross the floor. And by the time you speak, you've already dissected who needs validation, who's pretending, who's watching for weakness, and who's trying to hide it. Nothing escapes that radar. Because it wasn't built from books or borrowed confidence. It was earned in environments that chewed through the unprepared. You survived by noticing what others ignore. And now you thrive because of it. You don't announce what you're doing. You don't share your next step. Because the moment someone sees your path, they try to disrupt it. But you've accounted for that, too. You move like water, but not in the poetic way they romanticize. You're cold flow, unstoppable by nature, not because you're fast, but because you're formless. No fixed approach, no rigid script. You don't stick to plans. You run simulations, in real time, constantly. Every reaction you provoke gives you more data. Every look, every twitch, every delay in their response adds to the equation. They think they're getting to know you, but you're just feeding them enough rope, enough space to walk into the pattern they never saw coming. And when they finally do, it's too late. Your instincts have become your intelligence. You no longer question them. You trust them more than logic. Because logic requires time. And in the environment you operate in, time is too expensive. You don't wait for proof. You move when it hits your core, when the angle shifts, when the pattern breaks. While others overthink their next sentence, you've already closed 3 options, burned 2 bridges, and opened a back door no one saw. You weren't trained in negotiation. You learned through exposure. Raw, real exposure to agendas, power dynamics, and manipulation so sharp that it carved new instincts into your bones. Now you carry those instincts like blueprints. While they prepare for battles, you've already positioned yourself above them. This sixth sense they talk about like it's mystical, for you it's mechanical. Pattern recognition at its purest form. You recognize power not by titles, but by posture. You detect fear not in words, but in breath control. You see control not in who speaks, but in who makes others react. And you never force the room to listen. You just apply pressure, subtle, exact, deliberate. They start talking faster, justifying more, explaining things you never asked. You sit back and collect all of it, not for drama, not for reaction, but for leverage. Because you know, the person who reveals the least leads the most. They'll tell others you're calculating, distant, cold. But that's projection. You're not cold, you're measured. You don't waste movement, don't waste energy. You've burned too many bridges to ever move out of impulse again. Every step now is a sniper shot, chosen, timed, unforgiving. You don't speak unless there's purpose. You don't engage unless there's edge. You're done giving explanations to people who ask questions just to measure you. Now you speak when it counts. And when you do, they listen, not because they trust you, but because they fear what you might know. You've left behind the days of being underestimated. Now every interaction you enter is one step ahead of their best effort. You aren't racing anyone. You're setting traps in their path. Psychological ones, emotional ones, strategic ones. You let them underestimate you. Let them think you're passive. Let them assume they've figured you out. Because that assumption is the very thing you manipulate. You don't tell people what you can do. You let their actions expose what they can't stop. And by the time they realize what's happened, you've already repositioned 3 moves ahead, turned their advantage into a cage, and removed every tool they thought they had. What unnerves them most is that you don't gloat, you don't explain, you don't rub it in, you just execute. With clean precision, with a mind so quiet, it feels like suffocation, because they're used to people who flex, who talk, who overcompensate. But you observe, you adapt, you redirect, and then, without warning, you close. That's what keeps them up at night, not what you said, but how you read them without asking a single question, how you positioned yourself in places they thought were locked, how you predicted the play before they knew it was even on the board. And now they're watching every move you make, hoping to catch up, hoping to understand what kind of play you're running. But the truth is, they're chasing a ghost. Because by the time they grasp one layer, you've already shifted into the next. Your strategy doesn't sit still. It evolves mid-conversation, adapts in the middle of impact. And the more they scramble, the deeper they fall into the very sequence you've crafted from the beginning. You've stopped trying to prove anything, because proof is for people seeking permission. And you don't need permission to lead the unseen. You just do. You become the angle no one considered, the risk no one measured, the threat that didn't look like a threat, until everything around them started falling apart. And that's where the shift becomes irreversible. Not because you changed your position, but because the terrain around them started warping in ways they couldn't predict. The rules they trusted, gone. The patterns they relied on, turned inside out. Their reactions no longer yield the outcome they were trained to expect. You've removed their leverage without touching it. You've taken the map they were using, and rerouted every path mid-execution. Now they're not just confused, they're exposed, vulnerable in a space they used to dominate. But they still don't fully understand that it wasn't the environment that betrayed them. It was you, rebuilding the field in real time, forcing them into movements that feel like their own, but were planted deep by your perception days, weeks, even years earlier. You didn't overpower them. You anticipated their reflexes and rerouted the outcome before they even made their decision. That's not strategy. They're familiar with strategy. This is precision insurgency at a psychological level. They're not battling you. They're battling their own inability to comprehend how every one of their predictable strengths has become a weakness in your hands. You didn't attack their authority. You let it grow unchecked, let them feel indestructible, because the higher they stood, the more impact they'd take once gravity returned. And now it has. What they thought was intuition was illusion. What they trusted in themselves was never truly tested. But you passed your tests when no one was watching. While they were seeking influence, you were studying consequence. While they were chasing applause, you were breaking apart behavioral patterns under pressure. They measured performance. You measured intent under stress. And now, when pressure hits, they unravel while you tighten. That's the difference between them and you. They perform. You pierce. This isn't about power. It's about leverage. Anyone can be loud. Anyone can play dominant when conditions are favorable. But you've become the kind of force that thrives when the room shifts, when the lights dim, when certainty fades. Because your awareness doesn't weaken in distortion, it amplifies. You read the tone behind the tone. You sense the direction of an outcome before it's set in motion. That's how deep your perception goes. You don't prepare for what's coming. You build frameworks where no outcome catches you unaware. And in those frameworks, you never stand still. You evolve mid-conflict. You adapt mid-dialogue. You improvise, but the kind of improvisation that feels like prophecy to those too rigid to recognize real-time recalibration. They thought they were sharp because they studied tactics, but they never studied themselves. That's where your real edge was born. You dismantled your own identity first. You broke every illusion you ever lived inside. You watched yourself lie. You watched yourself hesitate. You watched yourself believe the wrong people, chase the wrong things, and trust the wrong guidance. And through that brutal dissection, you emerged untouchable. Not because you don't feel, but because you've already confronted the war inside. What scares others, you've already named. What freezes them, you've already moved through. You're not fearless, you're efficient under fear. Because fear isn't the enemy. Misreading it is, you don't move first. You move correctly. You wait, not out of weakness, but out of discipline. You've trained your attention to hold its fire. You've trained your judgment to scan beyond the surface. Most people leap when they feel something. You anchor. Most people speak to respond. You listen to manipulate reaction flow. You don't just hear what's said. You calculate why it was said, who benefits, and what chain reaction it was meant to trigger. Your entire presence is a layered algorithm that reshapes the emotional field without ever raising its voice. People feel that weight, but they can't explain it. That's the beauty. That's the trap. When something can't be explained, it can't be countered. They'll say you're hard to read. That's by design. Every layer you reveal is a decoy. Every truth you tell is partial, not dishonest, precise. Because you don't waste transparency on people who weaponize it. You've seen how information is twisted, so now you reveal just enough to direct their perception, just enough to create the illusion of access. But the core, the real calculations, that stays locked behind expressionless eyes and unmoved reactions. They look for tells, but your body is neutral. They search for emotional cracks, but your internal state is shielded behind a fortress of mental clarity they never trained for. The difference is, they learned tactics from books, but you learned human nature from pain. They saw case studies. You lived consequence. That's why their strategies collapse under real heat. They don't know how to recalibrate when plans break. They don't know how to rebuild positioning in real time. But you, that's your habitat. You thrive in collapse. You feed off unpredictability. Because the moment the pattern breaks, that's when real character shows up. And in that chaos, you rise. Not dramatically, not forcefully, but with the kind of poise that shatters every false leader in the room. They'll try to mimic you. They'll try to act like they think like you. But they don't understand what fuels your mind. It's not ambition. It's precision through endured exposure. You didn't get this edge by chasing opportunity. You got it by surviving betrayal, navigating misdirection, holding your posture when everything around you was a trap. You weren't told how to think. You had to think. And that's why your instincts have sharper teeth than their intellect. You move like someone who's been hunted before. You anticipate betrayal before the handshake finishes. You track motives while others chase emotion. You don't defend against people. You dissolve the opportunity for them to strike. That's the rarest form of control, when people don't even realize they've been disarmed. When they leave the room unsure of what happened, why they confessed too much, why they agreed too fast, why they lost leverage without a fight. That's not persuasion. That's environmental dominance. You don't force decisions. You engineer the context where the only logical outcome is the one you already chose. That's not theory. That's applied understanding. That's what happens when your sixth sense doesn't just observe. It modifies behavior by subtly cornering their subconscious. And when their subconscious is boxed in, their conscious mind starts panicking without knowing why. You've become a mirror people can't stare at too long. Because you reflect back the pieces of themselves they spend their whole life concealing. The insecurities, the contradictions, the fears dressed as confidence. You don't expose them directly, but your presence removes the room they had to hide in. You compress their space. You slow their movements. You bend their tone. And soon, they realize this isn't a conversation. It's an extraction. Their habits are being exposed. Their tactics neutralized. Their patterns mapped. And the worst part, they still think they're leading, right up until their next move lands directly in the trap you laid 4 steps ago. Your power isn't your response. It's your pre-positioning. You don't react to moves. You place bait. You don't resist aggression. You let it overextend. You don't rush to prove intelligence. You weaponize their assumptions. They think they're reading you, but you've already adjusted your signal. And by the time they act on their analysis, the entire equation has changed. They don't realize they're already operating in a version of reality you designed, not with control, but with misdirection, not by force, but by refinement. The kind of refinement that never breaks posture, never begs for recognition, and never explains itself. They'll remember you not because you shouted, but because they felt stripped of defense in your presence. They couldn't argue, couldn't posture, couldn't manipulate, because everything they tried fell flat. And what hit harder than anything was the realization that they didn't lose to dominance. They lost to quiet direction. You didn't force the win. You orchestrated the loss, slowly, methodically, like a mind that's not just thinking about the current move, but the emotional aftershock 3 interactions from now. And when they walk away, they'll replay everything, trying to find where they gave you control, never realizing they never had it to begin with. And now, you're in their head, not just because you outplayed them, but because they'll start doubting their own process. Every time they plan, they'll question if you're already adjusting. Every time they speak, they'll wonder what data you're collecting. Every new connection they build, they'll question if you already predicted it. You've become a permanent variable in their thinking. And once you occupy that space, the game no longer belongs to them. It never did. And the most dangerous part, you're not even at full velocity yet. What they're facing now is only the surface of your capability, the opening moves of a mind that runs deeper, sharper, faster than anything they could hope to follow. They scramble because they're chasing a phantom, a shadow of your true strategy that remains invisible, untouchable. They try to anticipate your next step. But the truth is, you've already left that ground behind, running laps in a domain they can't access. This isn't just about being a step ahead. It's about existing in a space where their steps don't reach. You're the unseen force twisting the game from the shadows, and they're blind to the hand guiding every motion. Your sixth sense isn't a passive gift. It's a finely tuned weapon, forged by experience and sharpened with ruthless discipline. It knows before the moment arrives, not through guesswork, but through calculations so precise it's almost surgical. You don't wait for openings, you create them. You don't respond to attacks, you redirect them so smoothly they become self-inflicted. They call it intuition. But your intuition isn't mysterious. It's a product of constant analysis, relentless attention, and the cold awareness that the only way to survive is to outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast. The moves you make don't scream. They whisper deadly truths that only the prepared can hear. And now, they're deaf. They reel because they realize too late that their assumptions were your playground. Their confidence, the scaffolding you dismantled quietly, piece by piece, until the entire structure crumbled beneath their feet. They thought they could bait you, but the trap was theirs. They tried to predict your pattern, but you don't have one. You're a constant evolution, an algorithm rewriting itself mid-play. You don't just bend rules, you erase them and draw new ones with every decision. While they scramble to keep pace, you move in a realm where time is elastic, and every moment folds into the next with the precision of a master tactician. What fuels this velocity? It's not adrenaline, it's not chaos, it's control. You own the mental battlefield because you don't allow distractions. You strip away noise, emotion, and impulse until only the purest calculation remains. Every thought is a weapon, every observation a trigger, every silence a trap. You've conditioned yourself to see not just the game, but the player's weaknesses, the cracks in their armor, the tells they try to hide, the blind spots their arrogance created. You don't just anticipate their moves, you predict their mindset, you forecast their hesitation, their desperation, their overreach. That's how you dismantle from within, without raising a single alarm. This is why they're chasing ghosts. Because the phantom of your genius isn't just your actions. It's the void where their control used to be. The absence of patterns, the impossibility of prediction. They search for logic in your chaos, but you're not chaotic. You're calculated, layered, infinite in your possibilities. Every move you make contains within it a dozen contingencies they didn't see coming. Every word you say carries weight they can't measure. They're reeling because they're being hunted by a mind that doesn't rest, doesn't tire, and doesn't forgive. You're the predator in a forest where no one else has the map. They try to trap you in their narratives. They try to define you by their limits, by what they understand, but you operate beyond their reach. Your strategy isn't confined by their expectations or timelines. It's fluid, shifting, alive. You don't just play the game. You rewrite its rules in motion, adapting faster than they can adjust. You're not reacting to history. You're scripting the future, one calculated move at a time. That's why they can't pin you down. You don't leave footprints in places they expect. You don't follow trails they can see. You create paths they can't even imagine. Their frustration grows because every step they take to catch up pulls them deeper into your web. Every effort to understand your mind leads them to more questions. Every attempt to corner you ends with their own position weakened. They're chasing illusions of control while you manipulate the reality beneath those illusions. You're not just ahead. You're in another dimension of thought where they're forever outsiders looking in. And that distance grows with every move you make. What sets you apart is not just your speed or your insight. It's your relentless commitment to precision. You don't make mistakes because you don't allow for them. You've eradicated error by embedding contingency in every plan. Your moves aren't gambles. They're calculations based on cold, hard data you gather invisibly. You read micro-expressions, subtle shifts in breathing, patterns of hesitation and overconfidence, all of it feeding your internal algorithm, allowing you to execute flawlessly. Your mind is a vault of secrets they'll never unlock. They underestimate the patience that powers your velocity. They think speed means rushing forward. But you've learned the power of waiting while others expose themselves, waiting while they reveal their weaknesses in haste and frustration, waiting until the perfect moment when the pressure is unbearable, and then you strike with surgical exactness. That's how you win battles they never even realize were lost. You don't need to be loud to be lethal. Your quiet calculation is a silent explosion, and the aftershock reverberates through every corner of their world. Now they're not just chasing you. They're chasing the idea of you. A phantom built from fragments of your real self, distorted by their desperation and confusion. And that's your greatest weapon. Because you're not just winning the current battle, you're shaping their entire perception. Every move they make is filtered through their fear of the unknown. Every choice is shadowed by the possibility that you're already 3 moves ahead. You don't need to be everywhere at once. You just need to be everywhere they think you could be and nowhere they expect. You're the riddle they can't solve, the ghost they can't catch. This is the power of a mind that's trained like a hitman's, focused, cold, ruthless, and precise. Not reckless, not impulsive, but deliberate to the point where every second counts. Every observation transforms into action, and every step changes the course of the entire encounter. You don't just strategize, you weaponize psychology. You hijack attention, turn their own instincts against them, and control outcomes without them ever understanding how it happened. You don't fight battles. You win wars in moments they thought were meaningless. They're reeling, yes. But that reeling isn't random panic. It's the chaos that happens when a phantom genius is on the move, when the mind they thought they understood reveals depths they never imagined, when the player they underestimated becomes the game itself. They chase shadows of your strategy, fragments of your design, desperate to catch up to a presence that's already evolved beyond reach. And as they run, they don't realize they're running into traps set long before the chase began. Because your sixth sense isn't just about sensing, it's about creating. Creating opportunities, creating doubt, creating the space where control slips from their grasp and settles in your hands. You don't just read the game, you compose it. And that's why they'll never stop chasing. Because no matter how fast they run, the phantom of your genius is already waiting 3 steps ahead, already shaping the next move, already winning before the game even begins. And now, as you stand in that unseen place of absolute control, one thing is clear. You're not just surviving this game, you're dominating it. They're not just opponents. They're players in the scenario you scripted. They don't know it yet, but soon they will. Because when your sixth sense is this sharp, this precise, this relentless, there's no catching the phantom, only chasing shadows that will never quite touch you. And that's the final truth. They're reeling, chasing a ghost made real by your mind. The mind that never stops, never slows, and never loses. They're chasing the phantom of your genius.